and welcome to County Executive's weekly press briefing. Today we are joined by our normal group of folks. We have Dr. James Bridgers, our acting health officer, Dr. Earl Stoddard, our assistant chief administrative officer, and as well as Sean O'Donnell, program manager for public health emergency response. We're also joined today by Chief Marcus Jones, who will be providing some remarks and an update on some of the things going on in the county. And lastly, we have Dr. Raymond Krall, who is the Director of Health and Human Services, who will also be here to answer some questions. Just as a reminder, if you have questions, reporters, please put those in the chat along with your news organization, and you will be recognized then. We'll start with opening comments from the county executive. So, Mr. County Executive, over to you.
Okay, so thank you everybody for joining us again today on our weekly media briefing. I don't think I have to tell you this has been a really difficult week for the county. We've been touched by multiple tragedies. For the first time ever, a student was shot inside an MCPS high school, and it's been shocking and saddening for everyone. At the same time, the Wheaton Volunteer Fire Department lost one of their own in a fire in Baltimore earlier this week. And the person from Wheaton is just one of 3 firefighters who perished in that blaze. And there are now multiple communities, in this state hurting from the loss of these firefighters. It's also a reminder of, what it means to be a firefighter and to be in a situation where the work you do puts you in danger and you literally are putting your life on your line when you do this work. So I want to acknowledge the sacrifice that these folks make and the sadness that we all share over the loss of these people in Baltimore. We are continuing to follow the developments in the homicide of a 17-year-old from Northwest High School who went missing earlier this month and was found in a wooded area in Germantown. And my thoughts go out to the families and the friends of these victims. I want to note that Chief Jones and HHS Director Dr. Raymond Krall are joining me today to provide updates and answer any questions you might have. But first, we're going to do the COVID briefing. Today, our positivity rate is down to 9.07. Maryland positivity rate is 13.47. Today's case rate is 579.81 per 100,000. We have seen a 51% decrease in the number of cases since last week. This is good news, and as you can see from this graph, it's helping to ease the strain on our hospitals here. Although these decreases from our recent peak are significant, it's important to note that our case rate numbers are still at the highest they've been during the pandemic. We can't celebrate just yet, and we have to pivot our focus on what's next. Omicron popped out of nowhere, and we'll surely see another variant. In fact, the news today is about a variant of Omicron that's beginning to pop up in the United States with several hundred cases. So people have their eye on this. There's concerns about its transmissibility. They don't know a lot about it, but they know that it's different and it has potential to be problematic once again. I think we're getting used to this, that every time we think we know where the end of the tunnel is, sometimes the end of the tunnel moves. And so we're going to have to see what they learn about this new variant. The World Health Organization reported that this variant could be more contagious than Omicron, and it warned against assuming that the virus will simply keep mutating into milder strains. There's no automatic rule that the virus becomes milder. COVID deaths and vaccine rates, it's widely reported that Omicron brings relatively mild symptoms, but I want everyone to know more people in the state of Maryland have died from COVID this month than any other month in the pandemic. And there was a story this morning about the death rate from Omicron exceeding where the country's been before, and largely due to the fact that it's infecting so many more people. The rate of death may be slower, but the number of people infected is greater, and you can have a slower rate on a larger population and wind up with more deaths. So it's something people have to be aware of. In Montgomery County, we've had over 120 deaths from COVID this month, more than the previous 4 months confined. So for anybody who wants to say it's just like the flu, not so much. However, we're only accounting for 8.4% of the state's COVID deaths, despite being 17% of the state's population. That's a credit to our high vaccination rate. But I remain concerned that only about 50% of the eligible population has received boosters, as we've tried to reiterate, week after week, that your protection from Omicron, from COVID, but from Omicron now, wanes after your booster. When you get beyond 5 months, the protection you had for the first 5 months is not the protection that you're going to have after 5 months. And it's making people vulnerable who feel like they've had their shots and they should be okay. You need to get the booster shot. It's important. We can see from the data that people who get the booster shots are less likely to get sick, number one, and less likely to have severe illness, which is probably the most important thing. We've seen, and Sean's going to get more into these numbers, that Omicron encouraged more vaccinations and boosters. We still have a long way to go, and we need to get there. There's now more testing available and easier access to COVID testing. Just this week, we heard good news that both our nation's COVID response in our local economy, Rockville's own Maxim Biomedical received emergency use authorization from the FDA administration for their new ClearDetect COVID-19 antigen home test. Our rapid take-home test distribution continues, and the options of these tests are very much in demand. Last Friday, I went up to the White Oak Library and handed out tests there. It was very cold, and folks had been waiting outside in the cold for well over an hour before distribution began. But despite the wait and the cold, these residents were very patient and very grateful. And the distribution system of our library employees and our volunteers was seamless, and the line moved pretty quickly. As of yesterday, we've given out nearly 800,000 tests and have 196,000 more allocated. This includes over 450,000 tests given out over the last 2 weeks at our libraries and nearly 300,000 tests provided to the schools. We're also working to make sure these rapid tests are getting into the homebound childcare providers and private schools as well. And we continue to encourage everyone to continue using our portal to upload your test results. It's hard for us to get an accurate picture of how many cases we actually have in the county if these cases aren't being reported. We originally were doing testing and everything happened on site. It was pretty easy to track that. But with at-home kits, you guys hold on to a lot of knowledge that we could use in the county. So if you've had a test and you're negative, let us know. And if you had a test and you're positive, please let us know. I want to note that this week is Mark Hansen's last week as our county attorney. Mark has actually served our county for over 37 years, has been our county attorney for the last 12 years and provided critical legal guidance over the past 2 years relating to our COVID response. Being county attorney is a tough job, and I appreciate his hard work and experience and constant availability, and I wish him well in his retirement. I'm going to turn it over to Sean O'Donnell and Dr. Stoddard before I return with comments with the police chief about MCPS student security. So I'll turn it over to Sean and Dr. Stoddard now.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ulrich. So just a few additional updates from our cases, our vaccination, our testing. Our vaccination rates continue to inch forward. We actually have seen some significant movement with our 5 to 11-year-olds whose families have been bringing them in. We are now in the mid to upper range of the 60th percentile for having a single vaccination in this age group. And we're very much near half of these children being fully vaccinated. We continue to encourage the families with children in this age group to come out and please get them vaccinated. This will, again, help to prevent the spread to other more vulnerable populations. We're still tracking, of course, our boosters and additional doses, and we are likely right around 50%, maybe a little bit above that in the eligible populations being boosted. We know that this is a much lower rate than who's currently eligible and who came out for the first 2 doses. And as the county executive mentioned, this is the best way to protect yourself from the ongoing variants. We're now more than 99% of the new cases over the last few weeks have been within the Omicron genotype, and boosters are the best protection against these new variants, and certainly from severe illness such as hospitalization or death. In tracking the latest group of eligibility, our pediatric vaccinations, we've shared this in the past, and what we're seeing is some increases in the distribution out to our Black and African American populations, as well as our Hispanic populations, proportionate to our other groups who have been vaccinated at higher rates previously. So we're continuing to work on making up ground with these groups, similar to what has occurred with the older age groups across all of our populations. As far as where in the county we're seeing vaccinations occur, they've been generally within the 5 to 11-year-old group, generally pretty even across the county, but we still have some areas in Gaithersburg and Germantown where we'd like to highly encourage families to bring out their children, and a few areas on East County. These are where we can make the most difference with childhood vaccinations. We're also tracking along with news and information and working on early stages of our plans for when vaccination eligible groups get expanded to younger age groups. And to give you a picture of the volume of what we're seeing in both testing and vaccinations, our volume of PCR tests that are administered at county sites has decreased significantly from a high right around the Christmas and holiday period. We can confirm that our sites are available for walk-up testing at all of the county sites, generally without a wait. So if you're looking to get a PCR test, we do encourage you to come out to a county site, or again, one of the private providers. Again, there's probably about 70 to 80,000 PCR tests are occurring across all providers in the county. So there is wide availability, and certainly that is returned back to a point where people can walk up at these sites. That was the additional data that we had to share, and unless Dr. Stoddard has any additional information you'd like to provide, I turn it back over to the county executive.
Dr. Stoddard, anything you want to add, or we go right to the
we can go right back to county executive.
Okay. Mr. Executive?
Okay, so I want to speak a little bit about what happened this week at Magruder High School. As an alumni of this school system, as a father and a grandfather to MCPS students, and as a former teacher, it is heartbreaking to see what happened in our entire MCPS community. And I know this has affected the community very widely. This is a harrowing event, to say the least, but we are not sitting by idly, and we are working with the school system to take appropriate steps.
Mr. Executive, just real quick, your camera is off, so if you could turn it back on.
Sure. Every time I click it, it turns off after I open.
There you go.
Better? Okay.
Yep.
All right. So Magruder students returned to class yesterday. They were welcomed back by our first responders and community members. And it's a sign that during our most challenging times, Montgomery County unites. The weapon in this attack was a ghost gun, a gun that the suspect received in the mail to his house in 3 different packages, each package from a different company, and it was simple enough for him to put together. This is the 5th ghost gun recovered from county schools during the school year. This is a serious problem. Bottom line is ghost guns are too easy to get. If you're ordering a regular gun, That gun would have to be shipped to a licensed dealer. You would have to go into the licensed dealer and provide proof of your age and your eligibility to own a gun. The ghost guns are shipped in parts. They do not go to a licensed dealer, and you can get those parts mailed to your house and put together an entire gun. This is such an obscene and glaring loophole in our gun laws that it needs to be closed. And I'm glad that State Attorney General Frosch, Senator Lee, and Delegate Lopez are ahead of this issue even before the latest incident, Magruder. And there's a bill before the General Assembly. And I support this bill and happy to lend any support that we can to get this bill passed. It is critical that we treat the selling of parts that can be assembled into a gun the same way we would treat the gun. I've been working with both Dr. McKnight and Chief Jones since this event occurred, empowering them to utilize strategies they see fit to ensure our students, staff, and parents feel safe and secure. I immediately agreed with Dr. McKnight's request to bring the community engagement officers back into the high school buildings for this week throughout the county. They'll work on long-term adjustments that they feel are necessary to ensure the safety of staff and the students, and we will continue to be supportive of their efforts. During the response to the incident at Magruder, there were many heroic acts and incredible leadership that created a calm response there, and I'm really thankful to Principal Dr. Leroy Evans and his administration, the teachers, staff, and the students who all worked together to get through this very long lockdown. And I'm especially grateful to Magruder School health nurse and HHS employee Megan Wilson for her life-saving actions that directly helped save the injured student. Her quick thinking and her understanding of what she had to do probably saved that student's life. And I'm really grateful for her quick thinking and her ability to keep that student as triaged as possible in the moment. We're going to continue to work together and support MCPD and Montgomery County Public School leadership to adapt to the challenges we're seeing in terms of youth violence. This is disturbing. I think all of us agree that there are moments when it seems as society is coming apart at the seams. We were looking at, higher levels of violence in some of the crimes and more engagement in youth in criminal activity, including more severe criminal activity. And it's a concern. And, I honestly believe that, dealing with Delta or COVID for 2 years has taken a real toll on people, taken a toll on relationships. It's, sent people spiraling into poverty and, desperation. It's made life as normal really difficult, particularly for people whose lives were stressed to begin with. And I think that, we're all painfully aware of the consequences of this, and we're going to continue to work as best we can to address what we can do to help repair the damage and help people see their way through this crisis. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chief Jones for any comments, and then we're going to take questions.
Thank you, County Executive Elridge, and good afternoon to everyone. I just want to provide just a couple of updates. Update on our victim who remains, the young student still remains in critical condition at a nearby hospital. And we continue to pray for, send prayers for his recovery. We are monitoring his health condition with the doctors a few times a day. So the latest we have is that he still remains in critical condition. I do want to echo County Executive Elridge's his words in regards to our work with Montgomery County Public Schools, as we are providing some additional support for them. Particularly at Magruder High School, we have provided some additional officers in order to be able to provide them with some safety nets as they continue throughout the rest of the week. We are also working with our our current community engagement officers are working with their assigned schools and working with the principals, particularly at the high schools, in order to come up with, again, checking in the mornings and being visible around the schools, particularly at the high traffic periods such as lunch, and some schools who have open lunches as well as dismissal, just to be in the area and again, work with our principals at each of those schools to provide them with the necessary support that they need during this difficult week. And we'll continue to work with MCPS as we move forward in order to make sure that we are working in hand with them to provide a safety net for their community. So that is vitally important as we continue to connect with parents, with the staff, as well as, and most importantly, the students in the settings to provide them with a safe place in order to learn actively on each and every day. So, so I'll pause there and turn it over back to Barry.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, County Executive. We'll now open up the floor for questions. And our first question appears to be from Kate from WTOP. Kate?
Hello, I had a question for both Chief Jones and the county executive. There is a petition right now to get SROs back in school buildings. What is the likelihood that the community engagement officers will be shifted once again to serve inside school buildings as SROs? And what would the mechanics be of making that happen if that's on the table?
Kate, I would just say that we are, again, working with MCPS in order to best identify what we think would be a best plan. We are not planning right now to go back to the old SRO program. I just want to make sure that's clear, but we are looking at potentially just seeing what are the needs and if there are any modifications to the current community engagement program at the high school level and again, understanding that we have responsibility for all of our schools, how we can best support those particular schools with the issues that we have. Again, not all schools, what I look at, are created what I call somewhat equal. Their needs are not the same. So that's for what, therefore, we have to really look from a wider spread approach, a wider approach, I should say, to look at what we think would be best fit. Again, not to go back to the old SRO program, but look at the revisions and how Dr. McKnight and we think can best serve the community from that aspect.
Gotcha. And county executive?
I think that Dr. McKnight made comments very similar to what the chief just said in the press conference. I guess it was yesterday. And very clear that we're not going back to the old system, but they're going to look at what enhancements or things they need to do going forward. I will say, no one's produced any, argument that an SRO would have made a difference in this particular incident. I think we all know they're not personal bodyguards, and it's kind of hard to keep track of when people decide they're going to go into a bathroom and have whatever transpire. So there's no panacea that says if only there had been an SRO there, there's no way this would have happened, because I don't think anybody can say that.
Got it. If I can do a very quick follow-up on the two students that Chief Jones, you said recently in a briefing, were in the bathroom and witnessed this and tweeted out. Are there is there a legal action pending? Is there, what's that situation right now? And lastly, quickly, the young student who was found at Grotto Lane in Germantown, the Northwest student, his mother says he was bullied. Does your investigation show any kind of link to bullying as a factor in that young man's death?
So I'll begin with your first question, Kate. The first question is there are no legal ramifications for those two. Well, I didn't necessarily say there were two, but we know that there were individuals inside the bathroom. But there are no legal ramifications for them not reporting the actual incident from that standpoint. And I think I spoke a little bit about, from a standpoint, the school system could look at, where there's a lesson learned and how we can better probably do a call to action for MCPS to really talk to our students and our young people about sort of what our civic responsibility, you might say, about what we should do in order to, again, protect our fellow men and women and students about, when they are suffering through some medical emergency, and how important it is to get the help there as soon as possible. And second of all, in response to the Germantown homicide case that we're currently working with the 17-year-old, we are looking into the possibility of the issues raised by the victim's mother. We are working with MCPS and communicating with the school Northwest High School, which he attended, to talk to several witnesses and staff members about what we can find out about what potentially might be behind what may have occurred, or what else was occurring over time with that young man.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Kate. Kate, next question is from Stephanie from Fox 5. I think she has a question for the county executive and chief.
Thank you, Barry, and thank you everybody for your time here. County executive, I'd like to ask you first, the question a lot of people are asking is why police are important enough to be in the school buildings this week, but not so moving forward.
I think that, what the superintendent said was they wanted to just provide a level of confidence or comfort to people who are a little bit shaken by this week. And it wasn't a strategic, defensive move. It was an effort to kind of reassure folks that if they had misgivings, or they were, if I don't know to what extent people in different schools have been affected by it. I talked to a couple of students yesterday who thought it was horrible and tragic, but we're not overly worried about their own situation. But we know that in other places, people are very worried about their own situation. So it's a move to help build a level of confidence and comfort, and it's okay.
And the other question for you, sir, is that, when it comes to school security issues, as I can tell you as a reporter at Fox 5, we've been covering an increase of violence within MCPS this school year in particular, noting a few issues. This is the first return from a very long period of virtual instruction. MCPS has been reporting staffing issues up and down. There was the removal of SROs this school year. There was an issue with a stabbing at Blair High School, a Churchill knife incident. We've reported on fights that ended or required football games to start earlier, Friday night football games. And then going back to the SRO program, even Seneca Valley created a volunteer Dads on Duty program trying to, help fill the holes there. When it comes to school security issues, the main question is, who does the buck stop with in the county?
I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to evaluate what's going to actually address the school security issues. I mean, you listed a bunch of things that have occurred before there were SROs in buildings and when SROs were in buildings. It's not like we haven't had fights before, not like knives haven't been present before. This is unique because it's an in-school shooting, but some of these problems have bedeviled us for a while with and without SROs. So they don't offer a magic security blanket for everything. And that's what, they're going to look at now is what do they think they can do or should do to address the concerns at the level they believe that the concerns are at. And this is something where both the school system and the police department have to come together and make a decision. And I'll support whatever decisions they feel they need to make.
Chief, if I can ask you, can you explain for the parents who don't exactly understand, what is the main difference between an SRO and a CEO right now? And does that meet the Maryland, law or requirement to have law enforcement cover MCPS schools?
Right. So the school resource officer was really designed to be directly That's okay. The school resource officer was assigned to be directly assigned to a particular high school and to work with that particular school and be in that school pretty much the majority of the day, but also have responsibilities for any school within its cluster that it may have to that the person may have to respond. The officer will respond to address any public safety need if available to do so. The CEO, the program that we've developed now is called the Community Engagement Officer Program, where basically it's set up through the school clusters. So the school clusters, each high school has feeder schools they go into their particular high school. So you have middle schools that feed into the high school of that particular community as well as elementary school. That school, that community engagement officer is responsible for the entire cluster. So the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, which requires that that law enforcement response, but not presence, you might say, in order to be able to respond, does not necessarily require that an SRO be in a school, but therefore that there is adequate law enforcement coverage. So that's how we address the adequate law enforcement coverage by having the CEOs assigned to each of the school clusters, and that CEO will respond to any school for a call for service based upon what we have agreed upon in the MOU with MCPS.
So who ultimately has the final?
Stephanie, can I amplify on that?
Sure.
Because before we even took the step to do this, a couple of us actually met with the state agency that oversees the laws around the school resource officers. And they were very clear that they also did not have to be in the school, but that we had to have a more robust response than just simply call the police. And as you know, if you followed this, there were people on the council who didn't like the idea that these folks weren't disbanded and there were no police at all. And there are some community, folks who didn't like that either. We've attempted to strike that balance to ensure there was a group of officers dedicated to schools who would be able to respond rather than only having the officers on duty who could be called off to any number of other incidents and not be available. This was a plan to keep these officers available to the schools. And if you remember, the original origin of all of this had to do with mass school shootings and people coming into the school. You think about, the incident in New York and the other incidents that have occurred. The idea was you'd have somebody in the school to protect you against that. Some of these things that are happening are very different than the mass school shootings that originated the idea that we needed to have police at the schools.
Thank you. Chief, I did want to follow up asking you, so who ultimately has like the final stamp of approval? Is this on MCPS, or it has to be an agreement between the school system and police to come forward with this memorandum of understanding?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, MCPS, again, we serve the community, and MCPS, it's their schools, it's their school system. We need to have, and what we've done is we've worked in partnership about public safety and around our schools for quite some time. This is not something that's brand new to our systems. We've been doing this for many years and working with schools to make sure that we have safety at all of our schools across the county. So the school system is really the way I look at it is they're the client, right? They are the ones who decide and say to us, like any other community would want certain services within their community. How do they work with the police in order to provide those services? That's what we're doing. And that's my job in working with Dr. McKnight in order to best come up with best solutions in order to provide that safety for our public school system.
Thank you both. I have some follow-up questions, but I'll toss it to some more of my colleagues and circle back if there's time.
Thank you, Stephanie. Kevin Lewis from ABC7, you're next up.
There, County Executive Elrich, you and the council spoke at length about adding mental health support staff for Montgomery County Public Schools. Compared to this time last year, how many additional mental health support staff members does the school system have?
I don't know how many they've been able to hire. They're authorized, their plan was to hire 50. They actually adopted a plan that was more aggressive than what either I or the council had originally proposed, but they've found hiring so far to be very difficult. There's an actual shortage of these folks and I don't know whether it's a shortage of qualified people simply, or it's a shortage of people who are qualified but don't want to come back to work right now. So they have struggled to hire, much like everybody else in the region has struggled to hire. So this has gotten a lot of ink in the press about the inability to bring people back to work. And where did all these people go who were working in these jobs before, who are no longer working in them? So I know they're struggling, but I know they're trying to fill the positions.
With resignations and retirements, is there the possibility that there are even fewer mental health staff members in the school system now compared to last year?
Since I don't know their numbers, I couldn't tell you that. Would I say it's not possible? No, that would be a silly thing to say. It's possible that there are. We may have to look at seriously changing. This is a school system decision, just like on our side, it's going to be our decision to look at adjusting the pay levels for some of these positions. We're going to do this again with police, for example, adjusting the pay levels so we can actually attract people. If we're not competitive with what people can get in the private sector, and there's a shortage of workers on top of that, we are always going to be at the bottom of filling vacancies. So I expect that, you'll see movement on our part to adjust pay to make it more attractive. And I would assume that the school system will do the same. And if they do the same, we will support them.
Is there an argument to be made that SROs should have stayed in schools until the additional mental health counselors, for a catch-all phrase, were hired? And so SROs were taken out and complement wasn't put in place?
So in the high schools, all the schools have multiple school security people. And what you actually see, which I think is a good sign and gets lost in all this, is a lot of incidents in schools that would have been handled before by calling in police are actually being handled internally the way we thought they should be by school security, which is a much better way of dealing with the problem than bringing the police in to involve the problem. So I think, the pluses of this kind of get unnoticed in a quiet way because you don't see the reduction in police engagement with students. But, from a student perspective, interacting with the school security officer is probably much preferable to interacting with the police officer. And I think the schools stepped up with their school security people to have them take a more assertive and present role. So I think there's some net pluses out of this.
There's been reports, and maybe this is a better question for you, Chief Jones, that after the lockdown had gone into effect, the alleged shooter, managed to get into the classroom after the door had been shut and locked, and that protocol may have been broken. I realize these situations are, you can't practice for every single potential variable. There's a unlimited number. But is that accurate that someone in a locked classroom allowed the alleged shooter in after the lockdown had gone into effect?
So Kevin, it's not exactly accurate, and I want to help to clarify this. So in a lockdown, right, MCPS staff have protocols in order which to follow. And the protocol was followed. And basically the door is to be locked, but prior even in the door being locked, that the teachers have a responsibility to look outside of their classroom, do what I think they call a quick scan of the hallways to make sure that there are no students in the hallway at the time of the lockdown being. And so no matter which student is out in the hallway at that present time, whether they belong in their classroom or not, that teacher is to get that student inside of the classroom and then secure the door. That was done. The teacher at that very moment, no one knew, right? Not even us, but no one knew. Even from that perspective, no teacher knew exactly who was the shooter in this particular circumstances. So I would probably bear to guess that this wasn't the only student that was pulled into a classroom during the lockdown someone who might have been lingering in the hallway. And so that's how that transpired and how that student got into a different classroom other than their assigned classroom.
Okay. Regarding the CEO program, the Community Engagement Officer program, how many CEOs are working on a given school day? And do they have multiple high schools? Do each one of them have their individual high school in the middle and elementary schools that fall below? Can you give a little bit more of a
Sure.
basic understanding of that program?
Sure. So for example, each CEO that we have assigned is assigned to one high school. So because the high school of the size of the high school, when we talk about a cluster, the cluster is designed out of that particular high school. So there are feeder schools, for example, for Magruder High School, you have a feeder school such as Redland Middle School is a feeder school that goes into Magruder High School. There's, I'm sure, other middle schools that I can't name off the top of my head that are close by that also feed into Magruder High School. That particular CEO is responsible for that high school, the middle schools, generally I think it's 2, and then there are the elementary schools that feed into the middle schools. So that particular CEO would be responsible for those particular schools, but understand that the high schools get the most attention for police response, but we do have, on occasion, we do respond to the other schools when requested to do so.
So during a school day, then there would be around 25 or so CEOs on duty?
Yeah, so there are, for example, yeah, exactly. And for those schools that we may not have an assigned CEO at that particular high school, we will give the responsibility to the commander of that district station to make sure that they have patrol units patrolling the areas to make sure they're stopping through and checking in. Because as much as we have our CEOs that are responsible for the high schools, I also have always been under the philosophy that if you are a patrol officer and a high school is in your beat, a school is in your beat, you as much own that responsibility as your normal patrol duties. So they still have that responsibility.
Okay, well, most of those CEOs are Montgomery County Police.
That is correct. Yes.
One sheriff, maybe some of the.
Yeah, we have a sheriff, we have a Rockville City officer, we have Gaithersburg City as partners in the CEO program, as well as the sheriff's office.
Final question from me.
Kevin, can we loop back? Because it's 1:25 and I want to get to some other people.
No problem. Thank you.
Corey Smith from NBC4.
Thanks, Barry. Chief Jones, real quick, in the release on the Germantown young man that was killed, you guys are investigating this as a homicide. What indications, if any, can you tell us that there was foul play involved here? The original release that you all sent doesn't make any sort of mention of it. So I was wondering if there are indications. I know the autopsy hasn't been completed yet, or at least the report released, but is there indication that foul play was involved here?
Yes, Corey, there's trauma to the young man's body. I can't go into that right now. We're still waiting for the medical examiner's, initial report. But we believe, based upon that gives us an indication that this young man, unfortunately, was murdered.
And I know that you may not be able to answer this question, but I was down in the area where officers were searching yesterday. It's a very steep incline. There's still a lot of ice down there. Is there indication that Mr. Jones was killed in the area where his body was found, or the body was ultimately moved there?
Yeah, right now we're treating that area as the possible area of the homicide occurring there. But again, there's more information that needs to be gathered for a final determination of exactly where in fact the set of events occurred.
And my last question, just if you can reiterate, when we asked about the bullying allegations, what exactly you all are doing with MCPS to try to get to the bottom of that? Are you interviewing students, teachers?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we have been already in contact with the Northwest principal and administrative staff. We are actively trying to interview those who have been brought forth, and we're encouraging the public's help that if they have any information on this young man or anything that they know about what might have been involved in this particular case, we encourage that to come forward, as well as any student.
Great. Thanks, Chief.
Thank you, Corey.
All right, next up, we have Steve from Bethesda Beat.
Afternoon, everyone. County Executive, I'm changing the subject here a little bit. It's Groundhog Day for me because in Frederick County, I covered a county attorney that left after 30 plus years as well. So I just want to ask you to kind of follow up on that. I'm sure Mark leaving, there's a lot of institutional knowledge there that you're losing after, I think you said he's been here with the county 37 years.
we have some other longstanding attorneys there who've worked on issues under Mark. So, the good thing is, and particularly in an office that covers the entire county, nobody's got the institutional memory of the entire place. So I feel like we have pretty good support there and continuity and staff. And they're going to be fine.
Do you plan to hire internally then to replace him? And I'm sure, you've worked with Mark over the years. Just what was it like to work with him on many issues, I guess?
He's an attorney, so all explanations are in attorneyese. But he's been good to work with, and I know a lot of his staff. I'm sure we are going to move somebody up internally to be acting, and then make a decision about permanent a little bit further down the road. But I'm really confident that he's got a good staff of people over there, and we're going to be able to work with them. And I think life will pretty much our work will go undisturbed going forward. I don't think you'll see any lack of continuity.
This next one's perhaps for Dr. Kroll or other health officials on the call. There's been a lot of interest about the health officer vacancy. Council members have started to ask questions at recent meetings. Can you give us a sense of, are we at a final pool of people? How many people are being interviewed at this point? Just specificity about how far along in that process we are at this point.
So I can answer that just shortly, Steve, that we are continuing our interview process. We have identified a number of top candidates that are at the top of our list for consideration, but we don't have a final selection yet. That'll depend on on them interviewing and getting past the county executive for approval for a nomination, and getting some a review from the state and an acceptance of a candidate from the state. So stay tuned. We're still working towards narrowing down the list to a few candidates that we are confident can not only manage us through this COVID pandemic, but also have the capacity and the skill set and interest to manage in public health beyond the pandemic.
I know the county executive said there's no timeline here previously, but given the demand for a health officer, and again, like council members have said, not to take anything from Dr. Bridgers, but is there any sort of idea when this might be filled?
Thank you for saying that. I just wanted to acknowledge that we do have an acting health officer in Dr. Bridgers, and to remind folks, as I do every Board of Health meeting, that it was not just Dr. Gales who was sitting at the head making all the decisions. He had a team of folks and advisors, including Dr. Bridgers and other folks that were constantly working on the guidance and on the recommendations that he was sharing with the public and with the Board of Health. So we expect that has continued on. That team hasn't gone anywhere. They're still doing that work. I think we are getting close, and I can't give you a timeline, but I think I have a sense that we may be getting closer to being able to move a candidate forward.
And I'll just remind you, this would have been solved weeks ago if the candidate that we had selected hadn't had second thoughts about taking a job at this point in I guess COVID's trajectory. This problem would have been solved a while ago.
I'm not sure how much you can say, but about the personnel interviews, how much does that come up? You mentioned this yesterday, Dr. Kroll, about how politically charged this is right now.
Oh, it comes up in the conversation with candidates. I think that some of them are current health officers. Some of them are contemplating whether or not they want to become a health officer. And so, of course, the politics of COVID and the level of divisiveness that sometimes erupts around things like guidance, like guidances and or mask mandates and vaccination issues that we see all across the country is impacting their decisions. They're looking at that and they're weighing that carefully.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Next question is from Amy Cho from NBC4.
Hi, Chief Jones. Thank you for taking my question. On the topic of SROs, we were speaking with Councilmember Jawando yesterday, and he was mentioning that as part of the reasoning as to why SROs are not necessary in schools, it's because schools already have a variety of security professionals, including teachers. He was referring specifically to teachers as taking on security duties. Is it your understanding that teachers would be expected to take on security duties? Is that fair to teachers? For instance, I did a story last week at Anacostia High School where all the teachers refused to teach for the day because of concerns over safety, students getting into fights, yelling at teachers, things like that. And they've requested more DC police presence at the school. So what is your take on the idea that teachers would be asked to take on these duties of security?
I wouldn't even start down that road. I mean, they're not trained for that. And if they take on those duties, they're sure not going to be teaching the kids in their class. I think, I'm not sure what he said. I didn't hear it myself, but I would just say it'd be hard to believe that somebody would suggest that that teachers become security people in their buildings. I mean, everybody, I'm a former teacher, you have to deal with classroom management, but that is way different than being counted on as a security person. I just don't see that.
I believe MCPS has 254 security personnel operating in the school system already. And so, I mean, obviously we're talking about the difference of 25 SROs potentially. And so obviously that's we have less than 10% of the officers are representative of the overall security force that the Montgomery County Public Schools.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple circle back questions and we're short on time. So folks, please go ahead and ask. The first one we have up is Stephanie has a circle back question for, I believe, the chief.
Thank you. Yeah, Chief, I know Kate asked you about any possible charges for the other students in the bathroom, but what about the alleged friend who helped the suspect assemble this ghost gun?
Yes, Stephanie, we are still investigating that part of it. We're doing some follow-up into possibly identifying who that friend may be. And so if there's anything that comes about it if there are any criminal charges, again, that we could charge that friend. But again, understand that it is not illegal, we just have to, again, see what the circumstances are. But, ghost guns being delivered in the mail is not illegal. Now, depending upon who the friend is and what's the age of that individual, that we'll have to make that determination of any violation of any firearms laws. But at this point in time, we are following up on that.
And then is there any possibility, obviously we want to respect the 15-year-old victim here, is there just any more you can share about the extent of his injuries? I understand he's going through multiple surgeries.
Yeah, I don't have anything to share, Stephanie, at this point in time about what are the specifics in his medical condition.
Okay, and then just two more for you. Is there a scheduled meeting next to discuss the future of the CEO plan with MCPS? Is there like a date that you can give to parents when this is going to be addressed again?
Well, I know you will be doing a follow-up with the council in the coming week or two to talk about where we are with the CEO program. We'll be still working with MCPS and in the coming weeks in order to really do an evaluation of what is needed as time moves on. So I don't have anything definitive at this point in time.
Okay, and then lastly, thank you for your time here. The question of, I understand you said in the press conference, you made very clear that the ghost gun used was disassembled and inoperable as it was. We understand the suspect made a choice to disassemble the gun. I just had a quick question of, with the parts that were in the room, if it were reassembled, would the gun have then been operable again?
Yeah, if it had been put together properly, it would have been more than likely been operable. Yes.
Is there any indication at what time, at what point the individual disassembled the firearm?
I have no information as to that.
Okay.
All right. Kate Ryan had a circle back question.
Yes, and this is based on what Kevin asked, and it's a really good question. But Chief, you said, well, it wasn't entirely accurate. So again, the student who is accused of this crime now was out in the hallway and was pulled into a classroom or brought into a classroom to make sure that, again, the folks not knowing what his role may have been, just knowing that we have a student in the hallway, we bring him in the classroom. Is that accurate? Were doors already locked and a teacher looked out and said, uh-oh, students out here, can you just clarify so I'm we're
Yeah.
accurate on that.
So Kate, all I have is that I know what the responsibility of the teachers are, is the fact that when we go into a lockdown, after they get their students assembled in the correct classroom as required and in the safe space, they are to do a quick scan outside of their rooms, quickly down the hallway, and anybody nearby, that they are basically to direct those students into their classroom and to be able to, and then lock their doors. So that's the information that was provided to us as to how the student was actually was brought into that classroom.
So it would not be correct to say that that student was out in the hallway after doors were locked and was brought in?
I would not say no. Like if you're given the impression that it's like after everybody's kind of locked the doors and settled in and they had not done their scan, no, I would not say that. It would not be like, like seconds after. I'm sure is as they did the scan down the hallway, that student was still in the hallway. And let me make sure this point is clear. This happened just prior, the event itself happened right at class change. So if I'm based upon what I'm told of the bell schedule, Magruder, that period started at 12:53, which meant that most students probably were in their classrooms, or as some students walk through halls and are tardy, were probably not in their classroom. So again, there's still a responsibility, and the lockdown went in at 1:05. So again, that the teacher still had the responsibility to do the quick scan, which they did, and they saw the student in the hallway to be brought in at that point in time.
Understand, and he was not in his assigned classroom, right?
That is correct, Kate, not in his assigned classroom.
All right.
Thank you so much.
And our last question is a circle back from Kevin Lewis.
Sorry about that. Chief, how much did the suspect spend on the 3 parts of the ghost gun? And did he use his own funds to purchase that ghost gun?
Kevin, that's still being investigated. I don't have the answers to how much the parts cost. We're looking into all of that, trying to get data and information as to, the purchase price and, where the money might have come from. That we don't know at this point in time.
Based off that question and based off the school shooting from Michigan in recent months, is there any evidence that mom or dad or any other guardian for that matter knew that their son had purchased this weapon?
We don't have any information that says that at this point in time.
All right, 2 other quick questions. I know that there was a lot of discussion about how long the victim had been on the bathroom floor before he was found by security. You had said around a minute. Is there any surveillance video near or outside the bathroom that could really iron out that time frame?
I don't know. I know that investigators are actually reviewing lots of video. And if there's something that we can zero down on at some point in time that we can release, we'll look at releasing that.
Okay, and then finally, with so much conversation about modifications that may or may not happen to enhance school security, and with SROs being such a hot button topic, would gun and drug sniffing dogs that wouldn't have to be, I guess, patrolled around the school by a police officer, is that a happy medium?
Again, I've heard that being brought up before. And not necessarily always a guarantee, particularly with the volume of students that we have at many of our high schools. Again, there are some situations that might be a happy medium, but I would not say that should be the norm. No.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right. I think that is about it. Stephanie, I know you have another question. I don't know, Chief, do you want to grab it or do you want, or should she grab you offline?
Yeah, no, let's do it now and I'll be done.
Thank you, Chief. Just one more question on Magruder. Is there an issue at that school in particular, any high schools in the county, where, say, some students may be engaging in certain activity in certain hallways because they know where the cameras are monitoring and where they're not?
No, I have no information, Stephanie, that suggests that students go into these specific areas and because they don't know cameras are there. I mean, there's always been the, not that a camera covers every angle of every part of a high school, but not, again, I'm sure that the security teams are quite aware of those blind spots in their schools, and probably they handle that from their patrol responsibilities.
So not an issue in this Magruder investigation?
No, it's not. No issue.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you all.
Just real quick before you go, just want to make sure, and it was mentioned several times during this last hour, the importance of talking about boosters. I know we talked a lot about the situation at Magruder, but for those reporting on anything related to health, please make sure that you emphasize the importance of folks getting their booster shot. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe, everybody.